8. We'll pick up in 9, but last week we finished up 8. But let me just touch on it one more time. Number 8 simply said this: who did the Jews say had issued a decree for them to rebuild the house of God? That's exactly right, King Cyrus. And we remember that. So if you remember, all of Jerusalem, the city itself, was sacked by Nebuchadnezzar. And that was in response, as we see about Nehemiah. Nebuchadnezzar is the one that sacks the town. And the fact is, all that's left is ruins. And then, of course, Babylon falls in 539 BC. Cyrus then releases the Israelites to go back home. And he gives them all the temple gold, the temple articles. In other words, that which Nebuchadnezzar had taken. Now, let's go back. Let's step back a little bit in history here. Nebuchadnezzar took all this stuff out of the temple, but he put it into the treasury, but never touched it. Now, that we have to give Nebuchadnezzar credit for. He never touched it. And the reason why is he didn't have any desire to defile it, but he had it there. And then, of course, if you remember, Belshazzar actually comes out, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him in a couple of seconds, and what Belshazzar does. But Cyrus then sends out this phrase as he sends out the Cyrus cylinder, which we saw the picture of last week. But the Cyrus, let me see if I can go back and get to that area. Give me 1 second. Okay, so let me go back. There's a Cyrus cylinder. So that's what the Cyrus cylinder looks like. And if you remember, when the Cyrus cylinder went out and it had the language of every nation that was under the Persian Empire. And that Cyrus cylinder basically says, and this is the phrase, if you remember, one of the phrases, any of his people among you. This was the releasing of the Jews to be able to go back home. And why were they going back home? They were going back home to build the temple to their God, the temple of Israel for them. And so in this Cyrus cylinder, it tells every governor of every province under the Persian Empire, let them go home. And by the way, give them things that they will use, silver and gold. And then he even tells to the governor of the Trans-Euphrates, give them timbers, cedars of Lebanon, and so on and so forth. So this phrase, any one of his people among you, he was talking directly about the Jewish people, the Israelites. Yes.
How big would that have been?
About this big, and about that round.
That was large enough to have all the languages?
Well, all the languages of those under him. Now remember, a lot of those languages, a lot of those countries were Greek. They were speaking Greek. So the Greek spoke to all those. And then, of course, there would have been Egyptian. And then there would have been Middle Eastern or Aramaic. And so we're not talking about a bunch of languages. We're talking like the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone, even though it was large, it was only 4 languages.
And where was it? Like, what did they...
Like, where is it at now?
No.
Oh.
No, was it part of the building or what?
Oh, no. So the Cyrus cylinder would have been sent like mail. So a courier would have literally taken it to each governor and delivered to each governor. And each governor would have basically read it. Okay. And then it would have been stored in their archives and kept. That's the reason why this one right here happens to be in the British Museum. But there was only about 3 Cyrus cylinders left, and they all matched each other. Except notice in this one right here, there's a chunk taken out of them. So the British Museum has one. I think there's one in the Egyptian archives, and I think there's also one somewhere in the Middle East. I don't know whether it's Turkey or Iraq, but now it may not be there now after ISIS did all it did. But there was 3 left in the world, that at least that I knew of at the time. Now they may have found other ones, because archaeology continues to go on. But this one here is at the British Museum, particularly. So yes, it would have been kept in their archives because this was a royal document that they would have had to, and this would also have been proof as to why did they let the Jews go. Let's just say 50 years later, somebody may have said, well, why did you let the Jews go? And it's, well, we have Cyrus. Cyrus said to do so. So does that answer your question? Okay. So what's that?
Don't look like that.
That's exactly right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, well, a lot of the northern countries and provinces would have all spoke Greek, because remember, this is a major time, like Greek. Now we would call it Latin, but Greek and Latin kind of concept. Yeah, Macedonia. So Macedonia, Greece, and all those areas, they all spoke Greek or Latin. So really, like an Aramaic would have covered most of what you and I today refer to as the Middle East, Palestine, Iraq, and all that. Because Aramaic was a was like the slang, if you will, of Hebrew, or a common language, I should say. So does that answer your question? Okay, great. This right here is made of so today we make pottery and then we burn it so that it hardens. And that's what this was. It was made of a clay, and then it would have been burned so that it would harden. This is the concept right here where we even use the phrase today, well, it's not written in stone. And that's the concept. When it was written in stone, it was permanent, never to be changed, that idea. All right, great questions. Any other questions? Okay, all right. So any one of his people, in other words, anybody of the Israelite persuasion, they are allowed to be able to go back home. In other words, it didn't matter if you were the governor of an area or if you happened to be utilizing or didn't want to let them go. You better, if you're under the oppression of the Persian Empire and the king of the Persian Empire just gave an edict and you don't do it, you will answer. Your family will answer, your property will answer, and somebody will replace you after you're dead. Because there is no, well, you're fired. Well, not like we said. There is no, well, you're not going to have the job. You would have been fired, and we all know what that means. Your property is burned, your family is killed, and you're the last to die. Nobody wants to do that. It's not worth it. And so that's the reason why. So this edict would have been sent out to the entire Persian world. And of course, if you remember when we read in chapter 1 of Ezra, Cyrus's edict was to all of Persia to be able to let them go. And we also remember this concept of all the people leaving with gold and with mules and with silver and brass and all that stuff. The only other time in history of the Israelites this has ever happened was during the Exodus, right before they left out of Egypt. They were given all this stuff. Now, for that aspect, it wasn't an edict from the king saying it. It was the people saying, take this and go. We don't even want you here. And of course, until Pharaoh changes his mind. But that's what we have, and that's what we have with the Cyrus cylinder. So that leads us into right here. So that leads us into 9. So what did the Jews say that King Cyrus had removed from the temple of Babylon? Exactly right. So we're talking about the gold and the silver articles of the house of God with Nebuchadnezzar that he had taken, if you remember, in Jerusalem. Now, this is what we needed to start talking about tonight. So remember, King Nebuchadnezzar goes in, sacks Jerusalem. By the way, every place he sacks, he sacks their temples. Why? Because the temples always had gold and silver and brass. And so he takes everything out of all those, including right here in Jerusalem. This would have been Solomon's temple. And remember, Solomon's temple would have been pretty much destroyed, but all this stuff was taken out of it. And this was around 586 BC. Now remember, BC, we're counting down, not going up. So BC, this would have been 586 BC. And he carries it all off, puts it inside the coffers of Babylon, and he never, ever does anything with it. He doesn't melt it down. He doesn't abuse it. He doesn't bring it out for fun games. He doesn't bring it out for parties. And that's really to his benefit. So he does not defile it in any way until Belshazzar comes. Now remember, Belshazzar is who we read about in Scripture as the king of Babylon. But we need to understand that there are 2 kings of Babylon at this time. There is Belshazzar, who, by the way, would have been a direct descendant, but there's also King Nabonidus. And Nabonidus and Belshazzar do not get along. Belshazzar and Nabonidus don't get along, so Belshazzar stays in Babylon. Nabonidus is actually at what they call the summer palace. And so he is away. And so that's the reason why scriptures we talk about Belshazzar, because that's who God dealt directly with. Because when Babylon falls, the whole Babylonian empire falls. It doesn't matter that Nabonidus is someplace else. But secular history will say Nabonidus. And that's the reason why they say, we don't even know this Belshazzar. Well, that's because you don't want to know who he is, but they're the same. Not the same person, but they're the king at the same time. All right, so that happens. And by the way, we see all this taking place in Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. This is also recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus in October of 539 BC. He writes, Belshazzar hosts a great feast inside Babylon, wining and dining thousands of his exalted guests. But then Daniel adds that Belshazzar brought out the sacred vessels and the utensils that Nebuchadnezzar had confiscated from the temple of Jerusalem, so that the princes, their wives, and their concubines might use them in blasphemous ways. And at that moment, a hand appeared, a hand of man appeared and began to write in Aramaic on the wall for Belshazzar and his guests to see. Now, in this case, this is what we see. Now, obviously, this is not a real picture of Belshazzar and his house, but the idea is this hand appears and begins writing on the wall. Now, you see just one word in the beginning of the second, but it actually comes out Mene, Tekel Upharsin, or Mene, Perez Upharsin, depending on which interpretation you actually have. And what it means is this. The Mene actually means your kingdom has been found wanting. It's been weighed and found wanting. And then, of course, the Tekel was the fact that you will lose tonight. You will lose your kingdom tonight. And then the Upharsin was to the Persians, which, by the way, happened to be Cyrus. So your kingdom has been weighed and found wanting. Your kingdom has been weighed and found wanting. Let me stop for a second. We've talked about this many times, but let me just go ahead and remind you so that we know what happens in the Hebrew and Greek when it's said twice. It's extremely important. You better pay attention. Your kingdom has been found or weighed and found wanting. Your kingdom has been weighed and found wanting. In other words, you're useless. And because of that, your kingdom will be lost tonight to the Persians. And that's exactly what happens. Now, to the benefit of Belshazzar, when this happened, the Bible, by the way, says that he was so fearful, as everybody was, but he was so fearful that you could literally hear his knees knocking. And so because of that, he had no idea what it meant. And so he calls in all of his wise men, if you will, his sorcerers, everybody. Nobody has a clue what it means. And then somebody said, but Daniel probably does. And so Daniel is brought in because he had already offered up to half his kingdom, as well as a purple robe, a gold chain, and leadership in the kingdom if somebody could tell him what was going on here. And Daniel comes in. He says he doesn't want the purple robe, the gold chain. He doesn't want half the kingdom, but he will tell him what it means. And he says, this is by God. And he says the exact thing that I just told you. And because of that, to Belshazzar's benefit, he gives him the purple robe, extols him as the fact that half the kingdom he is in charge of half the kingdom, gives him the gold chain. But that night he is killed, and he is actually, the Babylonian Empire ends and the Persian Empire begins, at least, meaning the Babylonian Empire ends, and it just encompasses all of it, because Persia was already wrapping around it. So that's kind of what's going on here at this point in time. So what would some of those things look like? Some of the treasures that would have been taken out of the temple. Well, let's go ahead and look at a few pictures here. So these are just items. Now, these are replicas, but I wanted to make sure that you could understand. So if you look at the picture on the left, now at the very top, so at the top, I don't know if I can, I can't use a little pointer. But at the top, you can actually see what it almost looks like a miniature size. Hold up, can I do this here? Let me see if I can. Give me 1 second, guys. Let's see. Can you see that? Yeah. All right. Hey, I'm getting pretty good at this technical stuff. All right. So this right here is a mini replica of what many believe the Ark of the Covenant would have been like. Now, the Ark of the Covenant at this time would not have been taken by Babylon. It would have been gone and hidden. But the idea is that it had gold. It was inlaid in gold. But all these things would have been. Now, this would have been brass. So all the labors were brass. But like the menorahs. And by the way, the menorahs, we're talking 4, 5, 6 feet tall. And they're all solid gold. And they would have had 5 menorahs, or maybe even more. Actually, I'm going to be showing you a video not long, just in a few minutes. And the video is going to last about 7 or 8 minutes. But it's like a 3D version of a tour of what the Solomon's temple would have looked like. But not only that, but then these areas here are called showbread tables. And this is where the bread is made. And the bread it was unleavened bread that was made. And it would sit on the tables for 7 days. And for 7 days, the priest would eat the bread, and at the end of the 7th day, it would be replaced with new bread. So everything about it. Now over here are all the goblets. This is the stuff that would have been brought out for the drinking, to be used in a defiled way. So that's what all these things would have looked like. Now, obviously, they may have been just as pretty, if not even prettier, but that's the stuff that would have been made of the bronze and the gold and the silver. That's the stuff that's taken out. By the way, also, you should also know that the walls would have been scraped down because the walls would have been overlaid in gold. So they would have scraped every wall as much as they could from top to bottom to take off that outer layer, as well as all these articles which were solid, except for the Ark of the Covenant, because the Ark of the Covenant was made of acacia wood and it was overlaid. But everything else, as far as like the table, the bronze lavers, the candlesticks, the menorahs, the goblets, all that stuff would have been solid gold or silver. And that's the reason why they would have been taken. And at some point, they would have been able to be melted down, and they would have been able to be used for other things. And so that's the reason why those things would have been taken. That's what's inside the treasury of Babylon. And when Cyrus comes in, he gathers all that stuff out, gives it back to them, and says, take this back as you rebuild your temple that you may worship your God. So that's a little bit of that information there. Any questions or comments about any of this that we've covered so far tonight? Somebody say, Paul? Oh, okay.
Did you say that Belshazzar was a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. As a matter of fact, Belshazzar. So the theologians say one of two things. They're not sure if Belshazzar is actually the son of Nabonidus, and Nabonidus is actually Nebuchadnezzar's son, and so therefore, really, Belshazzar would have been his grandson, or vice versa. They're not sure about that. So either way, he's a direct descendant. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Okay, so then what's coming up next, and hopefully it works out well. Let me go ahead. Oh, no. Please let the laser pointer work. Okay. Let me try to get back to, oh, okay, here we go. Please start. Give me 1 second here, guys. And if I have to, I may have to go out and then play it and then come back in. Let me just see if I can. Yeah, I may have to. This is so I'm not so good with this technical stuff yet. Yeah, well, I won't have to turn it off and turn it back on. That I know. There we go. Now, oh, it went right back as soon as I clicked it. All right, so let me just do this. I did. Huh? I'm clicking it right now. You just can't see it for some reason. All right, so. All right, let's try this. Click. I clicked it, everybody. All right. All right. So let me do this.
Take your clicker and click the arrow. Use your red button to click the arrow. I am clicking.
See, I got my wife talking to me now. I'm clicking the button right as we go. Ready? Click.
But you're not on it.
No, you're not on it. The red dot has to be on it, baby.
Do me a favor. Steve, walk up here so I can have a witness real fast. May I have a witness, please? Come on up. I need you to see this since nobody believes me. Okay, everybody sees the red dot now? See the red dot?
I did see it up there.
All right, you see it right now, though? Okay, now watch where I'm at. Click.
Boom, there it is.
All right, so let's go ahead and do this. Everybody just bear with me, guys, all right? All right. So let me stop sharing for a second. And show, okay. Now I know that you guys, give me 1 second here. All right.
That's what you get for bragging about how technically savvy you are.
Okay, so can everybody see that's the Solomon's Temple right now out there? I know it's smaller, but can you see it?
We can't see it at all.
Give me 1 second. Well, I either that or I can do this right here, and everybody can now see it.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Now let's go ahead and do this. Well, they can see it now.
No, what I'm saying is if you expand it, then look at the screen. Watch the camera.
I get that face all the time, girls.
Well, let's just try this. Okay. Give it 1 second now. Because I'm going to be upset if it doesn't. Oh, here we go. Okay, so everybody watch. You should be able to.
Can't hear it.
Maybe it must have been
Yeah. All right. Let's do this. Okay. Let me just stop this here. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing with you guys again and bear with me for 1 second. Okay. Now. You ever heard of backseat drivers?
Is your computer turned on? Your computer sound turned up?
Yes, my computer sound is up, sweetheart.
She's just trying to help.
Can you all see this?
Yes.
Where's the volume?
It's visual, right?
Yeah, I got it at 100. I was so excited about this for you all to see. Okay, I can tell you this.
Is there closed captioning?
Well, no, there is no speaking. It's just music. So just watch.
Somebody hum.
Can you see this out there in Zoom land?
No, we can't see it, Bubby.
There's the music.
Okay, listen up.
It was the crown jewel of Jerusalem.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Bob. I didn't mean to throw you off. It's back at where the guys.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Something in his hands.
Yeah, because we can't see anything.
I know. I'm trying to get you guys involved here.
Love you, honey.
I know. I know. Everybody loves me. Okay, can you all see that now? I know it's small.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so I'm not going to have the music, but let's just play it. But they can't hear it. Okay, so just watch, and I'll do my best to edit and talk. Okay? This is Solomon's temple. This is a man writing. Okay. Now, you'll notice the lavers there. They're all brass. On the side, this is the temple area. This is the western wall. We're going to look in more detail about this later. Geography and history, obviously, you can read that part. Yeah. So this is what it looks like prior. So you can see the Temple Mount up there. But this is what it looks like with the three valleys. Now, that's Mount Moriah. That's the stone right there at Mount Moriah that many believe this is where Abraham took Isaac to be sacrificed. And that's where the Temple Mount is built and today has the Dome of the Rock. Okay, so this is the region of Moriah, understanding what that is, which I just told you about the sacrifice. But this is the reason why this is such a disputed area. So you can see the rock on the right at the top. That is the point of Moriah. So this is the lower city that they called that before David took it over and made it his This actually is where he made it his capital. And when he makes it his capital, he's bringing the Ark of the Covenant back. This is when they're rejoicing. They're playing trumpets. And this is when David supposedly, you know, the concept of dancing in his underwear, but really it's his undergarment. This is the inside. You can see now the show tables and all that stuff. And they're going to get into detail here in a minute. But here's the stone. The threshing floor here is what David bought from a man. And the man said, I'll just give it to you. And he says, no, there can be no sacrifice if it's free. So in other words, it must be paid for. That was, by the way, a foretelling of what was to come with Jesus Christ. Sin must be paid for. So obviously this area here, getting ready to go through the doors and into the building, or what we call the temple, and they're going to show a comparison. So there's the stone again. That's what the Dome of the Rock's built over today. But you can see the temple was on top of it. And this is how the city is expanding. This is now the upper city. So this is a comparison of the tabernacle in the desert and the tent. There's the tabernacle in the desert. That was the days of Moses. For 400 years, that's how they worshiped. And then, of course, they're going to be showing now compared to the temple. This is Solomon's temple. Now he's going to... So what they're talking about right here is many believe that Moriah, that the mountain of Moriah, the region of Moriah, could have possibly been, this is always debated, by theologians to be the Garden of Eden. And that the tree of knowledge of good and evil sat higher. And because of that, when they're cast out to the east, the cherubim's put there with the flaming sword to keep them out. Now, not a lot of theologians agree with this, but it was part of this. And that way I wanted to make sure that if you ever heard this, that's what it is. So some people say that this hilltop here is actually the place that, in other words, the tree of knowledge is actually where the cross is placed. Now, once again, that really takes an awful lot. But so he's showing you the inside of the tent of meeting, and they're going to show you how it compares to Solomon's temple. So you see how it's the holy place, and then the Holy of Holies, the outer courtyards. And they're showing you that one more time. And then, of course, you're going to see this is where the high priest would go in on the Day of Atonement in order to do. And the idea is they're passing from the outer world into a holy place and then into a much holier place, the very presence of God as they go into the Holy of Holies. And only one day a year could the high priest himself go into that. Now they're showing you a side view of the comparison, how when it was built, now it was actually giving you levels that when you came from the outer world into a holy relationship, before you could go into the Holy of Holies, there had to be this cleansing. In other words, to go into the presence of God, there had to be a cleansing. But before you could even go from the outer, there had to be a sacrifice. And they're explaining now what a cubit was. The idea is really roughly 18 inches from the elbow to the tips of a finger. But this is where the sacrifice would have been made prior to going in and sprinkling the blood around the mercy seat. And of course, we're talking about right now that this is on the same mountain region that Jesus is. Also the same place that Isaac. Now these are the 12 bulls. The bulls always were a symbol of power and a symbol of strength. And so they actually hold the laver. This is called the brazen sea. And this water was considered to be water that would be moved into these other lavers that have wheels. And they were taken around multiple places on the outer camp, the outer ring here, so that when they were doing different ceremonial cleansings, they had portable water to take with them. And that's what and those were all solid bronze. And this is where you can see how they would prepare their hands. These outer rims were made so that they could put floors. And the floor levels, actually the wood, and they're going to show you, was put on these ledges so that each floor could be walked up on through a ladder, but they actually were built into the temple itself to hold the weight of whatever they needed to be able to do worship together. Meaning to go before God. And now they're going to show you somewhat what it looks like going inside the temple here very, very briefly. But these pillars, solid bronze. So all this stuff would be taken by any of the enemies that ever sacked them, because bronze was melted down into multiple things. And this is the open flower, which is pomegranate. And the open flower was the concept of there was many seeds. So that was the pomegranate was the symbol, one of the symbols of Israel, because remember, Abraham was going to be the father of many nations. So many seeds were planted. So this is explaining the doors now, most of which was brass as well. The only thing that was not brass or laden with brass was the curtain between the Holy of Holies. All right. So now, of course, this is what they're doing. They're showing the incense. So remember that you had the sacrifice outside, the burning of the animal, but the incense were like frankincense and pleasant aromas, because that was representing the rising of the prayers to the Lord, which we actually talk about in Revelation. So, the prayers of the saints rise to the nostrils of the Lord as a sweet aroma. So there's actually the palm trees with the pomegranates again. And then these are the menorahs, and they would have been on both sides. And these things, like I said, would have been about the height of a man, if not a little bit taller. Now you can see the table of showbread sitting there. But all this stuff, and the walls were laden as well with gold. All this would have been stripped, and all this stuff would have been taken out. No, just the priests only. And only the high priest can go back to the Holy of Holies. Yeah. And so they're explaining the unleavened bread here and how today it's used actually in communion. So that's what they're doing in this part. But the priest would eat the showbread, so they'd make 7 days of showbread, and so they would eat it. It's almost like communing every day, and then at the end of 7 days, new bread had to be replaced, obviously, because now it was gone.
Is that the bread that David ate?
Yes, that's the bread that he and his men ate. Exactly right. And once again, they're showing a difference between the sacrifice and the sweet aromas of the incense and the difference of the two. Now they're getting ready to see, you can see the curtain. Now they're getting ready to go into the Holy of Holies.
That curtain was way thicker than what.
Oh, much thicker than that. Yeah, it was huge. Yeah. And they're just talking here about the fact that the prayers of people going up before God, and that's why they're explaining. Now, here is obviously the ark, the concept of the Ark of the Covenant, with the cherubim on the top of each side, but on flanking it as well were also cherubim. Now, you should understand, so that this is how he had to bow in holiness or bow in reverence to go in. This is the ephod that they had to wear, the high priests, in order to go in. And talking about this material here, was laden, actually the gold was actual gold strips that was laden inside there. The symbolism of the cherubim again going in, and now you're about to somewhat enter here. Now they're using these doors to open up, but yeah, it would have been a curtain here. All that would have been gold. I mean, like these large cherubims on the left and right that almost look Egyptian, this all would have been gold. And now they're talking about that the Holy of Holies was a perfect cube, 20 by 20 by 20 by 20 by 20. So it was a perfect cube. And once again, that could only be entered one time a year, Day of Atonement, by the high priest only, with bells on him and a rope around his ankle. Now, by the way, you can find this on YouTube if you want to watch it again with the words. But again, this is looking from the top, looking at the brazen sea, and then, of course, the water basins that would move at the different places, all the menorahs on each side, the gold on the walls, the brass and the gold in the doors, and then, of course, inside the Holy of Holies. And like I said, if a high priest went into the Holy of Holies and did something wrong, he would die. The bells would stop ringing. And, of course, the idea that now Jesus is the one that actually took the curtain down. Because of what he did, there's no separation between God and man anymore. And that's it.
Is there any record that a priest ever had to be yanked out by his ankle?
Well, the only reason why I think we know that had to happen is obviously somebody did it.
Well, I know.
Yeah.
I don't think Scripture.
No, we don't find it in Scripture.
But I know there's other writings out there. I just didn't know if there was.
Exactly. There's no place in Scripture that we read about it. Now, let me get back to this. And I'm going to get down here because I hate that screen now. All right. Now.
I know it was all bronze, but I got to know. Did it smell like pennies?
Did it what?
Did it smell like pennies?
Paint? Oh, no. I don't think so. I wasn't there, though. I know you think I'm old, Jonah, but I mean. All right. Okay, so give me 1 second so that everybody out here can see again. And let me get here, start to share. All right, let's see here. Can you guys see this now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, so with that in mind, where are we at? Okay, we got time. All right. So with that in mind, I wanted to go ahead and show you, we kind of saw a little bit about, this is what it currently looks like today. So this is the Temple Mount today, all right? And this is just a little bit of a graphic so that you can kind of see. Now, if I don't have the capability of going back and making my little thing here real fast, but right down, and you can't see it, but right down here towards, so you can see the Dome of the Rock. That's the prominent. So right down at the very base of the Dome of the Rock in that empty area, that is the Western Wall, okay? So that's where it's located. You can see the words probably Western Wall, but that's where the Western Wall is located. That is a part of the Jewish quarter today. So that's where they go. And the reason why they go there is because there is the foundation in and of itself. That's the only thing that they have access to anymore that connects them with Solomon's temple and so on, is the Western Wall. So now the Western Wall has all the stones. And I know that me and Caleb were talking about Egypt and the pyramids and some of the size of their stones, but you have to understand, and by the way, you can look this up. Some of the stones that were used for the foundation, the Western Wall itself, as well as the Temple Mount, some of them are from me to that wall long, probably about 20 feet wide and probably about 7 to 8 feet thick. I mean, we're talking multi-thousand-ton stones. And they were moved there to build this. Huge stones. As a matter of fact, the Romans pushed some stones that big off the mount when they were trying to scrape all the gold, because they weren't thinking when Titus set it ablaze that, oh, there's gold in there. And so they go in, he sends in troops to basically bust down the walls and begin scraping the gold off the walls after it had kind of melted into cracks. So that is where the Western Wall is. The Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock is, that's actually where the temple sat. So it would have been facing that way as east. Okay, so this is west, obviously with the Western Wall. That way is east. So right out in front of that was actually the Mount of Olives. The Garden of Gethsemane sits on top of the Mount of Olives. And so this is the modern city. If you look around, you can see all the little different gates that was all over the city, including Solomon's stables in the far right side at the top. That's where Solomon's stables ruins are. But this is what the Temple Mount looks like today. Now, the problem is, let me just go ahead and say, it wasn't until roughly about 600, or here, let me go to the next one if it lets me. Okay, so. I know, I did. I really did. I don't know why. All right, give me 1 second here, guys. I want everybody to be able to see this. Let's try it this way and see if it works. All right. Guys out there, can you all see that? Can you see the Temple Mount?
Yes.
Can you? Oh, now can you see that? But you all.
I can see Temple Mount and Western Wall.
Okay, give me 1 second. Bear with me 1 second, guys. Let's try this again. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties. Let's get right here. Now let me come back here and share. And can you all see that now?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Okay, you can. All right. Okay. Now, all right, guys, follow along with me here because I'm going to get back my little clicker, my little laser pointer. All right. Now you can see this area. Now you can see how tall the people are right here. So from here all the way up to here is actually during what they call the Herodian Ashlars. Now what that means is these are Jewish leaders. So this is where they're building up. And by the way, in that layer, all the way up to that, you can see 3 different stones or 3 different styles of stone as they're building from the days of David all the way up to the Herodian Ashlars. Now that's all the way beginning in 19 BC. Now this is, in other words, this is as high as it was at one time. And then in this area from here to this area, which this red dotted line is actually where the Temple Mount is. That's the top of it. But from this area up to here was rebuilt in the 600 ADs by this group here called the Umayyads. They're actually Muslim. And so they build to that area. Therefore, they can put the Dome of the Rock on top. Because remember, the temple had been not only knocked completely down, but every stone rolled off, which fulfilled the prophecy of what Jesus said, that not one stone will be left on another. So the temple is completely gone. It's nothing but a flat top up there. But you know what's exposed when that's all done? That rock. And that rock, everybody in the Jewish world, because remember, Muslims actually come out of that teaching. They know about Abraham. They know about Isaac. They know about Ishmael. They know about all that. That rock is exposed. And so they go to the Temple Mount knowing that's where David built. And there they build the Dome of the Rock. That's why it's called what it's called. They all, as well, who believe Abraham is their father, but they're direct descendants of Ishmael, they believe that's where Isaac was about to be sacrificed. Therefore, they build a shrine over top of it called the Dome of the Rock. And so they're the ones that do that level from this area up, because remember, it had been destroyed in 70 AD. And so they build it up. And then from this area all the way up, you can see they're much smaller stones. And they're added during the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire ends, of course, and it starts in 1866. And the last course is put on there, if you will, by the Sunnis in 1967. We know what happens after that. The 1967 war happens. And when it does, all of Israel's claimed back by it. I mean, all of Jerusalem is claimed back by Israel. And from that point on, there's always been tensions. So, but they were just claiming back that which always belonged to them. But that's the reason why you see all these different layers. But from this area down, there are 3 different layers of stones. But look at this stone right here. It actually starts here and goes all the way nonstop to here. And if you look down at the people, it encompasses probably about 20 people, 20 men, by the way, because this side of the Western Wall is men only. There is a large curtain, or actually plexiglass now, and on the other side is the women's side of the Western Wall. This is men only. So it encompasses men who are shoulder to shoulder up against this wall. That's how large these stones, and they were just as equally wide as they were long. And they were usually, if you want to look one more time here, this right here is probably 4 foot, 5 foot tall. And these were all moved in by men and placed here. So the Western Wall to them is their only connection with the temple, with the presence of God. And remember, Judaism says we must rebuild the temple in order for Israel to be restored.
It's 9 foot thick too.
Oh, it's even thicker than that in some spots. Absolutely. So Israel says we must rebuild the temple in order for the Messiah to come. The Muslims say the Messiah won't come as long as there's a Muslim mosque. And then on the eastern side of the wall, the Muslims in the 600, 700 ADs actually put a graveyard, because a good Messiah would never trample graves to get there. So it's a constant battle back and forth of how we're going to keep each other from doing whatever we want. And that's the problem. What they don't realize is the Messiah's already come. The temple doesn't matter. The Temple Mount doesn't matter. All that matters is a relationship with Jesus. And you don't find him in the wall, and you don't find him in the Dome of the Rock. That's exactly right. And the Messiah's already come, so we don't have to worry about trampling graves, because anybody saved in Christ will already have been risen. They're already with him if they died. All right, so that's that information right there. And I'm sorry that the technicalities and all that stuff took so much longer. Is there any questions about any of that at all? Any of what we talked about? Anything about the articles? Anything about Belshazzar? Any of that? Or chapters 1 all the way up? I know that was a lot of history. I'm sorry, but I love history. You just kind of have to put up with it.
Do they see something in the cracks?
What's that? Oh, yes. Matter of fact, when I was there, I mean, if I were to guess, I would say probably in the cracks, as high as a person can reach and as deep as a person can push, there's probably millions of prayers inside those cracks. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. People will write prayers out and pieces of paper like that, and they will roll them and roll them and roll them, and then they stuff them, and they'll take pins and push them back into that crack so that nobody can get them out. Now, they don't ever go in there and remove those things, but like I said, when I was there, standing in front of the stone, some of the smaller stones at the bottom, and I say smaller, meaning maybe double the width of this. I mean, around the cracks that you could see, I mean, you could just see the paper was. I mean, I bet you most of that wall is being held up with paper. I mean, they're stuffed all the way back inside there, and they just go back as far as they possibly can. And the ones that fall out, there's a code among the Jewish men. So if they go up to the wall and there's 2 or 3 pieces of paper on the ground where they rolled out and somebody else pushing theirs in, the idea is that it doesn't matter if it's yours or not. You pick them up and you get them stuffed back in. Every one of those prayers stay in the wall. And when we were there, of course, our guide said, if he were to guess, 99% of those prayers are for the that they would be able to rebuild the temple so that the Messiah would come. Now, and then of course, obviously, there's a percentage of Christians who simply go and say, we already know who the Messiah is, and thank you, Lord Jesus, blah, 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 and stuff them into the wall. When I actually was there, I actually wrote out a little prayer of thanking God for salvation and thanking God for the opportunity to be able to be there, but stuffed it back into the wall. It's probably still there somewhere. So, but it's an amazing place to see, but it's also a very volatile place to be at, because you never know, because this area, 5 years ago, while people were there praying, was sprayed with gunfire, and a lot of people were killed. A guy walked into a rabbinic school, killed 32 rabbinic students, and it just happens and goes. And when I happened to be in Israel, which is in 2008, when it was in 2008, when I happened to be in Israel, the 32 rabbinic students were killed 2 weeks prior to me getting there. And when we were there, we were actually in Bethlehem, and we were on the Palestinian side of the wall, because it's like a Berlin Wall that divides Bethlehem. I mean, it's a 30-foot concrete wall. About every football field, there is a guardhouse bunker guarded by Israelis, by the way. And so the only place for us to stay was on the Palestinian side. Well, on the Palestinian side is a lot of the Christian things, like, for example, Manger Square. So while we were in the hotel, my friend, his name's Nathan, he's a preacher up in Cincinnati, and he actually said, he's standing on the balcony, and he said, well, this looks like an unusual religious celebration. And so I come walking out and look down, and I said, that's not a celebration. And he says, why do you say that? And I said, because those are AK-47s. And they were carrying them. And what it was, they were protesting that the day before we got there, the people that killed the rabbinic students were trapped at Manger Square. And the Mossad, which is their secret police, came into Manger Square, tried to arrest them. They basically fought them. Crowds were beginning. And so they just sprayed them, killed them with gunfire, and got in the vehicles, and then they left. And the Mossad was able to get out. And so they were just protesting that. The next day, life was back to normal, which I was very happy about, because we were the only Americans in town. Everybody knows where the Americans are when you're in town. So anyhow. So Israel is a very volatile place to be. When I was there, I felt very safe. But at the same time, in a heartbeat, you can go from feeling safe to, okay, we've got to make sure that we have 2 avenues of escape here, because we don't have AK-47s. So we have to be able to get out of here. So every place we stayed in a hotel, the guy that I was with, his name was Dr. Zeese. I would say to him, okay, Dr. Zeese, I'm gonna go ahead and look around and find a way to get out of here. And he said, that's a good idea. So that's what we did. But we really did feel safe most of the time, except when people started getting dysentery. Then there was a problem. So, all right. Any other questions at all?
You say you can go up on top of that, or you can't?
You can go up. When I was there, you could go up on the mount. We walked around the Dome of the Rock. When I was there, you could not go into the Dome of the Rock. But now, supposedly, you're able to go back into it again. But we walked around all over the Temple Mount. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can go back. So you can see where the Dome of the Rock's at. You could walk all the way around that. By the way, these little pillars that are up, they literally are there. And that's part of the original colonnades that was around the outer court. We could walk all around that. We could take great pictures of the Mount of Olives, but you just could not go into the Dome of the Rock. You had to have special clearance for that.
But the Jews cannot or will not go in there?
Well, no, there are some Jews that go up there. There are Jews and Muslims that get along well there, but there are radicals on each side. So yeah, no, Jews could go up there. When I was there, they could go up on the.
I mean, why do they focus on the Western Wall instead of the original colonnades or something like that? I mean,
I guess because, I don't know, I guess because the Western Wall was back to Solomon's time, and some of the colonnades were replaced by Herod. So that's the only thing I could think of. But the day that I was up there, I mean, there were Jewish men walking on the mount because they had yarmulkes on. And that's the only people that wear yarmulkes is Jewish men. So But we walked all over that area into the tree line because there were people having picnics in the trees. And then we came out the other side, this far side down here by the, I got my little marker. There was a little area to come out and come down into the city there. And that's where we came down. And we made our way around and came back to the Western Wall again.
How long is that from the mount?
The mount itself is, I think the mount itself is, I think it's 1 full acre squared is the mount. But all of this area up there, the outer court and everything, probably about 4 or 5 acres. It's not as huge as you think, but it is big.
It's not that big at all.
No, not at all. Over in this area, by the way, this is Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is an Islamic museum, and anybody was allowed to go into those areas. You could tell attention whether you were in the Christian quarter, the Jewish quarter, or the Muslim quarter, or the Armenian quarter. Those are the 4 quarters of Jerusalem, and you could tell the difference when you walked into each quarter. There was a difference in culture, but there wasn't like this people staring at you kind of thing. It wasn't like you were walking through the back alley of Newport, nothing like that. So, but like I said, it's neat to see. You just have to make sure you're going at the right time and going with enough people. I happened to go with 23 seminary students, and of the 23 of us, there was about 4 ladies and the rest were guys, most of which were young guys and able to, if something happened, really hopefully defend ourselves. It's hard to defend yourself against an AK-47 now, unless you have an AK-47 or a grenade. But any other questions or comments about any of this at all? Okay, I can tell you this. If you ever happen to go to Israel, you should go with a group and you should go with a tour guide who has been to Israel many a time, because they know where to go and they know where not to go. You don't just want to go roaming around. The last place you want to be is in the wrong area in Israel. You don't want to be there. It's no different than if you're not from this area, you don't want to wander into over the Rhine. You want to be very careful about that. And people from the area will say, yeah, don't go there. You need to go over here. And that's the reason why you always want to have somebody that's either there. The guy that I went with that year, his name is Mark Zeiss, Dr. Mark Zeiss. He was at Cincinnati Christian University for over 20 years, but he has been in Israel for months at a time every year since 1984, and he's my age. So he is actually an official Israeli tour guide. Anyhow, and when he goes on study tours, and they're a little bit cheaper. Like right now, you'd pay about $4,700 a person to go there for 7 days. But with a study tour, sometimes you can get for about $1,000 cheaper. Still a lot of money, but nonetheless. All right. Did you hear one fight? Okay. Questions or comments before we close out with prayer? Next week, we will start then fresh in chapter 6 of Ezra. Fresh in chapter 6 of Ezra. So let's go ahead and close out with a word of prayer. Father God, we thank you for all that you give us and for the opportunity to talk about things like this, to put things in perspective, especially when it comes to the temple, what that means to the Jewish people, and going back home out of exile, what that would have meant to them to take back the very things that they always knew were part of their temple. And Lord, how you preserved them, even during a time of exile, you preserved them and then sent them back freely. So bless us and be with us, Father, as we always continue in our study, that we might not only know why we read what we read and understand it, but see the history behind it, which makes it come to life. And in doing that, Father, when we talk about Scripture, we don't talk about it as if it's just a book. We talk about it because it is real and the accounts are true. Bless us, be with us, and guide us always. For it is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.